this negative and turn it into a positive, and then I'm anti-fragile.
Yeah, it's like, it's good. I didn't want to work anyways, you know? Sick.
It's the same thing with getting fired at your job. It's like, yeah, I needed the time off.
Yeah, thank God.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Books, Beer, and Banter. I'm Shane. I'm here with only Joe today. Lucas is not going to be joining us because of 5,000 different reasons, but so he'll be joining us in
All pretty valid by
next
themselves, you know?
all
All
very valid.
individually
Yeah,
valid, compounded, overwhelmingly fucking valid.
yeah, exactly. So he's dealing with some stuff, so we'll leave that up to him if he wants to chime in on the next episode with that. But anyway, we're starting a new book. It's Antifragile by Nassim Taleb. So it's the second book in this series. We started with the Black Swan. Now we're on to Antifragile, which is basically the Black Swan is like, you know, how essentially randomness and like randomness creates these like asymmetrical events where like these very unprobable events have a massive impact, and they kind of shape the world. And he like lays everything out in the last book in the Black Swan. Then in Antifragile, it's called, the subtitle is Things That Gain from Disorder. So it's kind of how to live knowing that that's the case, that there's these random events that have massive impact. And so it's like kind of laying out the best approaches to living in a world full of black swans. And so we're back at it. Joe, I don't know if you want to kick us off with one of your topics, and we could just kind of roll right into it.
Yeah, well, I thought a good way to kind of introduce the book, the idea, everything would be kind of going over, exactly what, kind of like what you said, though, like fragility versus anti-fragility versus even robustness, kind of, because we're going to be using these terms a lot over the next four, like this and three
Yeah.
more episodes. I think having like a firm grasp on it is like a good idea. And it was funny because I feel like at certain times, like the concept of anti-fragile seems like very obvious to me. And like even while I was reading, I was like, okay, I get how he means it in this context. But there was
Yeah.
other times when you're talking about like anti-fragile thoughts and like and like stuff like that, where it starts to get a little bit
Yeah.
more like elusive. I'm like I'm not seeing it as clearly like in my mind. But I think, just like I was saying, just the anti-fragile part of it. So basically, like you said, anything where that has more upside than downside, basically from random stressors or events or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that. And I liked how like stressors was something that we talked a lot about last episode, which was the last chapter of the last section of the Black Swan. I think because it was kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a prelude to this. It was like about like robustness and stuff, but there was a lot
Yeah.
on stressors, and that being like the almost like the determining factor in if something's like fragile or anti-fragile is like how it reacts to that stressor and how it I guess like benefits the overall system, if you think about
Yeah.
them like either way like that. They're just like complex systems. But I think something that kind of lost me was the difference between robustness and anti-fragile. Because he was saying it's
Yeah.
like robustness is like best case scenario, like nothing happens from a
Nothing
random
happens. Yeah.
event.
So it's like a stone. Like it's like dropping something. It's like dropping a stone. Like a stone is robust. Like the best case scenario, like nothing happens. Like it stays the same. Whereas like a teacup is super fragile. Like you drop it and it like shatters and like it's destroyed. You know what I mean? So like its best case is that it survives. Whereas like robustness is like best case is that things don't get worse, but it never gets better. Whereas
Uh,
like he uses the example of like the Hydra, where it's like if you chop off one head of the Hydra, it grows back like two more. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So
yeah.
like it's always like when it gets hurt, it gets even better. So it's like there's this gaining from the random event that happens. Whereas with robustness, like you have something that's just very strong, where like it's reinforced and insured. Whereas anti-fragile is like, hey, bad things happen. You're actually going to make out even better.
Yeah. So, but like, I guess if you could, like, what's a more abstract example of something that's robust? You know, like the rock makes perfectly good sense to me in the teacup. But then you get like robust is just like normal every
Well, so
day.
all
You know
right,
what I
so
mean? Like
so robust is like, I think you can think about it like with his barbell analogy. Like robust is like being properly diversified, quote unquote diversified in the market. Like you could have, money in gold, you could have money in bonds, you could have money in stock, you could have some money in fucking crypto, and like if the market goes if the market tanks, like your value of gold will go up and it'll cover some of your
yeah,
bases on the stocks going down. So like your best case scenario is that like things stay the same or are traditional. Like you have expected amounts of growth, whatever. But the worst case scenario is that uh, everything goes to nothing. But with like his barbell approach to investing, which I think we'll talk about deeper in like the book here, but it's like you have 90% of your money in cash. So like you are very secure with that 90%, but 10% of your money is in very risky, like high leverage activities. So like, hey, you buy all these options contracts. So when things go to shit or things go really well, you make like insane amounts on that. So you're gaining from like his investment strategy, you're gaining from the market going to shit.
yeah,
Like you're by being 90% in cash, you have all this money to invest when the market tanks. You know what I mean? Like your best case scenario is the market tanks. You know,
yeah.
um,
Okay, that kind of makes
so
sense
like
then.
that's where I think that that's a little bit more. Whereas if you have a very diversified investment portfolio,
You're
your best
robust.
case scenario is that you're just at
Yeah. It's like
status.
all that effort, all that emotion and like turmoil or whatever and like nothing happens. Zero increase, zero
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
decrease. Like
Which like good, cool.
it's
Like you're
good.
robust.
Yeah,
Like
I mean
cool.
it's
Like
all
you
right,
didn't
you
lose
know.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's all right.
But it's
You
better
still
than
went
being
through
like
you
you
still
had
went
all.
through a lot, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? But to get nothing out of it, it's like, well, at least you didn't lose anything, yeah. But
Well,
it's
it's
still
better than
like
having all of your money in like two stocks that you just like all of your liquid assets in like two stocks, and then the market tanks and you lose 90% of your
yeah,
wealth. Like
yeah.
that's extremely
Well,
fragile. Like, you
yeah.
know,
Yeah,
so it's better
absolutely.
than that.
I just like I don't know. I feel like trying to, and I think it's like a muscle. I think you're just gonna have to like, or I'm just gonna have to kind of like work out, but like just like every day, just trying to think of things in like the terms of like fragile or or maybe it's not like an everyday thought type of thing though. Like, could that possibly be it? It's like maybe it's not something where I'm walking down the street. I'm like, that's fragile. That's anti-fragile. It's more like larger scale decisions. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's like when making a decision, like, is this going to make you
Is gonna put you as
here?
yeah. It happened. Wow,
Sorry, my
that
audio.
15% went quick.
I know.
That
Wow.
went, dude.
15% was really quick.
That's been 20 minutes. Are you kidding me?
Kidding me? So anyway, I think it's like you think about it in the context of you. Like, it will doing this thing make me more fragile, or am I getting towards being anti-fragile or robust? Like, robust isn't like a bad thing. Like, you want to at least be robust.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
can't be
Minimum
anti,
acceptable position right there.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So like, hey, am I in a robust position doing this, or am I make exposing myself to like it's kind of like, hey, am I exposing myself to randomness? Like Lucas is such a good example because like so much of this shit has been happening to him.
It's all
But
just random occurrence. Dude, he's the prime example of this book, I swear to God.
yeah, we were talking about it in the last chapter of like how I'm in a different state of being like fragile. Like I'm not anti-fragile, but like I know the risks that I'm taking essentially. Whereas there's all this hidden risk that like accumulates. And Lucas is a perfect example of like, oh, his dog gets like sick and he needs to spend like thousands of dollars or whatever, and it's like,
Spoiler
oh,
alert.
yeah, little did you know this other thing that was gonna happen too that makes you like, holy shit, like what? Like of course these things happen all at the same time, but it's like completely random. Like you could have never like literally we were talking last time of like, yeah, but like what is random? Like you can like how can you not see things coming? And it's like Lucas's dog, like you can't
Yeah.
see that coming. Like you can't foresee that. So like
No, you
that's
can't.
just the perfect example of something that's like
But how could he have been? Okay, so I get the randomness, you know what I mean? But like, how could he have been more anti-fragile, like leading up to the scenarios, I guess. So like Charlie getting sick, is there anything that is like is there really anything you could do? Is there a difference between fragile and anti-fragile when your dog eats garbage and gets sick? Like I feel like that's so out of like everything.
So you could be robust. Like, of course, you're not going to gain from that, but you could at least recognize, like, hey, do I have thousands of dollars in the bank? So when this happens, like, and that I'm not in a bad position. Like getting the dog in the first place. You know, like you could think about getting a dog in the first place. Like, hey, medical accidents happen, and like I may need to shell out $2,000 to $3,000 for this pet at one point. Like likely that I will have to shell out a couple $1,000 because of something happened.
I saw on Twitter today some lady was like her brother's dog is 3 years old. It looked like a German Shepherd or like a Malinois or something like that. And it needs like a bone marrow transplant or some shit. $43,000.
Dude, no, you're not.
43,000. Like that is like, all right. I thought about that, and that was like a real moment for me. And I was like,
what's your cutoff point?
Yeah. I was like, Nova, I love you so much. Like it's crazy. But like 43,000, that's like set you back for a while money, you know?
They're almost better off that it's 43,000 and not 13,000, because they probably would spend 13,000.
I would in a heartbeat.
Exactly, but 43
is way too much.
But so at 13, you're out 13 grand. You know what I mean? Whereas at 43, like it, in some way, look, I don't own a dog, so I feel comfortable saying this. You don't have to even chime in, but like it makes the decision for you. You know what I mean?
Oh
so
yeah, easily.
That randomness, you get lucky almost. Like, hey, you're on the look. I mean, if you think about it, about being anti-fragile, it's not actually being anti-fragile, but like
not loving anything, letting anything die. You'll never be upset. Is that how you become the most anti-fragile? Just lose all your emotions and you're fine.
No, but I mean, dude. Well, like, dude, you think about it.
Well, you could buy pet insurance. That would make you more anti-fragile. Well, no, that would make you robust. That would make you robust.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think you're gonna be getting a pet induces fragility. It makes everything harder, and it makes things more expensive. Like you can't move as easily, and yada yada. You know what I mean? Like there's just maybe that's not like that's an overshot, but like you think about it, you have to when you make those decisions, it's like, is it worth it? You know what I mean? And like for me, it right now recognizing like, dude, if I get pet like a dog, like I might. If that happens to me, like, dude, it's not worth it for me right now. And like I think about that.
Well,
like,
even just the way you said that, if that happens to me right now, who says that? If they want a dog, you know, like if that you just like if that's thrown upon me right now, I will deal with.
If the injury, if I got a dog, and
I thought you meant the dog.
Yeah, no. Like a dog's just gonna appear on my lap. Like I'm gonna take it in. Like that's a random event, if anything. But like, dude, I mean, you think about it, it's at the decision point of like, do I do this or not? And like thinking about, does this make me like how much risk or like fragility am I introducing into my life? Because 43 grand, like that you could have that in savings and just be like, we're doing it. I don't even care. You know what I mean? And then it's like,
you gotta be well off.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, if that's all of your savings and you make that decision, like, dude, you just wiped out your entire savings.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't, so that's,
But so what if going into getting a dog, you're like, no matter what, I will never pay more than $10,000. I mean, like, nobody would do this, but I'm just saying, it's like, if you're like, I will never pay more than, like, $10,000, like, on a surgery, then, like, I don't know.
If the surgery is $11,000, you're doing it. Like, so it doesn't even matter. It's not even. Like,
that's the problem there, and then 11 goes to 15 to 2, and then you're, oh, God. Sparky!
Well, the problem is if you set 10 and then it's 20, you're like, oh, it's only 10 more.
Yeah. It's not the original. It's not a whole lump sum 20. It's just 10 on top of it. But let me ask you this. What if You get a dog. You're a young kid. You're single. Okay. You get a dog to pick up chicks. But you don't go. You walk the dog in hopes that a chick comes. You're not like actively trying. And then a woman comes into your life and you love her and you get married and whatever, happily ever after. That would be like, would that woman coming to the dog, would that be a random event? Like, that's not like random, right? That's like,
you can't predict that that's gonna happen.
you can't. But so like on that fucking note, then that you would you be anti-fragile?
You'd be gaining from
Randomness. Unless a randomness was a car hitting your fucking dog, and then you.
Yeah. But it's not like you're gaining from stressors. You're gaining from positive black swans. Like that.
Yeah. You're right.
Whereas like you're exposed.
Facts.
Facts. You want to be robust at least to the negative black swans, and then be like
susceptible or like whatever to the positives, being able to take them.
Like open yourself up to the positive random events.
Yeah.
Which like doing with a dog, you could figure that out. You're exposing yourself to potentially meeting new people.
We met friends from Nova, dude. I swear to God, like, it does happen.
Sure. And who knows if that like if you didn't meet those people, like blah blah blah. You know what I mean? So there's definitely arguments to be made, but it's just a good example of like introducing a point of fragility into your life and making that decision of like, is it worth it or not?
Yeah, no. So definitely I see it like this. Yeah, you're not walking down the street just thinking about shit is fragile or not. It's decision making times is when you start thinking about it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
you see someone like with something like
you what?
With it, like you could see someone like, oh, someone bought a fucking new car, like someone our age leased a BMW. Like, was that the best thing to do with their money? Like they leased like, or they bought a new BMW. Probably even worse.
Yeah,
they just bought
in cash, full amount.
No, not in cash. Just not. They didn't even buy it in cash because that would probably be better. Because they
wouldn't have debt. Oh, because debt. Yeah. He goes on a lot about how debt's up. Yeah.
Because if you destroy that car and you owe all, like, of course, insurance, whatever. But like, you get the idea. Like, was that a good or a bad decision? Like what in terms of this like this single way of thinking about ideas.
Yeah.
I feel like this. It would be cool if this like. I don't know. I feel like there's got to be more ways. Like, I know there are like more ways of thinking about decision making than just like this like robustness, fragility, anti-fragility model. Like talking about like mental models.
I know there's like decision matrices and shit. I don't know if like that's exactly like along the lines, but like there's stuff like that. I once like when you
make a decision, if you're like, you could just think like, okay, is this exposing me to fragility and not, and how much risk like. The worst case scenario, like how bad could this be for me, and like
or potentially good.
Yeah, and then where?
But I feel like we don't think. I feel like I don't know. I feel like I feel like it's hard to like be anti-fragile and just like the day to day by like if you're I just can't like unless you're. Like in the markets, or like he says, there's an example with he's like, if you have excess inventory for like a rainy day, and then something happens with supply chain in China, then you have that.
If you have savings, you can be anti-fragile.
But why?
Because if you have savings, then you have money that you can invest in. Like when the economy goes to shit, you could like, dude, the market tanked in like March, and then now it's back and better. Right now, you know what I mean? Like you could have made a 80%, 100%, 200% return on whatever money you had in like a few months. Which like, look, or you could have just not.
Can you be anti-fragile in a context different than like money though, or is that like what it's meant like for? Like at its core, like can you be like, does it make sense to even like think about it like that and anything but like without like, all right, without like gains, like how else can you be? I don't even know. He probably talked about it. I don't know. I'm not just like not thinking about it, but as we're just talking, it's just like, how could you in anything but money. Like, where can you be anti-fragile?
Like one of the points you were gonna bring up is like evolution. Well, there's like levels of like the system level type stuff, but there's like I think
On like an
um
individual, on a person basis, not on like the grander scheme of shit.
so I think you can introduce like what he talks about with like I think he mentions it here like talking about like fasting and stuff like that. Like you can introduce stressors into your life that you gain from like
Yeah,
medically. But I think that's like we're naturally that way. But in terms of like
like
I don't know,
like like cultural or like social
but I think I mean it always comes back
anti-fragileness.
to money because in every other area you're just trying to be robust. In
Yeah,
some
right.
like with your health, like you can't like regenerate a limb or something. Like if you get hit by a
Yeah.
car, you're not going to get better. Like
That's why I don't know. I was just trying to think of like a different way. I mean, because it makes so much sense. Like with money, it's very clear. You know, even if it's like a little foggy, it's clear though. It's semi clear. It's opaque. But I don't know. Like just and else and
oh
like
dude, so you can think about it with I don't want to say gain from disorder. I don't know about gain, but you could think about it as like um because part of this is like by removing stressors. Like, so there's this idea, like, there's inducing fragility. So, like, you can become more fragile by removing stressors from your life.
yeah,
Like, like the California wildfires. Like, if there was more controlled burning, there would be less large scale fires. Like the forests need to burn in a sense. Like we
yeah. So
think
they
we're
don't
so
collect and like have all
yeah,
that
so that
combustible shit.
exactly so it doesn't eventually like it's a perfect example of like the black swan or whatever like the massive event where it's like okay like we had nothing because we like didn't let anything burn and then boom there's this massive fire you know um but so you could like induce fertility but I don't know how you could then make that well I guess in it I don't know you can't make it like
Yeah, how what would ever be anti-fragile to that? Unless it was like if you are gonna buy that property on the low, if it wasn't like a national fucking park, or I don't know if it is or isn't, but
I mean
you know, if you like
like
if you stand to gain because it was destroyed,
I
could
don't know if he talks about it. I think he might like later on, but there's this idea of like you know the fragility of like a teacup, but in like some in like I don't know if it's Japanese, but there's a culture where like when something breaks, they like fuse it back together with gold, and like they take like you drop a glass and it shatters in pieces, and they like put it back together with like gold like lining or whatever, and
yeah.
it makes it prettier than it was before because of the damage. You know what I mean? So like that's obviously like
A made up
like it
example. I
but
know it's
like
true, but
no, but it is kind of like it's a stretch. It's why he uses the Hydra as an example because it's a mythological character. Like there's not many ways to like
well, that's what I'm
you know
saying though. It's like then like what the fuck if it's so hard to get to, you know?
how much stuff like how much of your personal security and whatnot is tied to money. You know, like all of
Bro, I
it.
got no money. I'm robust. I can't go up. I can't go down. All right.
So that's the thing of like it really comes back to like it like having money for I think it just mostly I think it comes back to money. I don't really know.
Yeah. No, I think it's because A, it's the easiest to see, and B, as Wu Tang said, cash rules everything around me. You know, so it's always fucking dependent on it. So might as well. But
Yeah, I think there's career examples where like use of your time maybe like I don't know how like it's kind of a stretch, but like being um even for myself, I'm not like I'm doing client services or whatever, but like there's business models like working for yourself where, hey, if everything goes to shit, like people are calling you because they need help with X, Y, and Z. And if everything's great, then people are calling you because they need to do this other thing, whereas with a full-time job, it's like you could get let off, you know? But that again comes back to the whole like it's tied to money.
yeah.
but or maybe it's with time. It's like, hey, things go to shit, so you have like less. You're still staying afloat, working for yourself, but you have less work, so you have more time. Like, great, you get to use that time, but like
You could catch up on other shit. Yeah, that's being anti-fragile. Huh? It's all, but like I feel like that ties so much to your mindset. You know what I mean? Like that's a very like subjective anti-fragile, right? You know what I mean? Like you'll have like
take this negative and turn it into a positive, and then I'm anti-fragile.
yeah, it's like it's good. I didn't want to work anyways, you know. Sick.
Same thing with getting fired at your job. It's like, yeah, I needed the time off.
Yeah, thank God. I was trying to work on myself anyways. I'm being anti-fragile. You should read up about it. That's fucking hilarious.
That's a skit from nerds.
I can't. Yeah, right.
I celebrates getting laid off. He's like, dude, I'm anti-fragile.
Dude, we're gonna make like a parody skit and fucking send it to Taleb. We're gonna tweet it right to him, right?
All right. Well, let's get into our freaking topics. We have.
So, what's your section? I mean, your
So
topic
my-
that you want to talk about.
It's he who has never sinned. ... But essentially, like, there's this section on page 74 where he says, he basically talks about this, like, turn out to be Mother Teresa or blah blah blah. So she didn't turn out to be Mother Teresa or Rosa Luxemburg, as she dumped her first rich husband for another richer person, whom she dumped upon his first financial difficulties for yet another richer and more powerful and generous lover. In a non-volatile environment, I, and most probably she too, would have mistaken her for a utopist and a saint. Some members of society, those who did not marry her, got valuable information, while others, her victims, paid the price. So then he says, further, my characterization of a loser is someone who, after making a mistake, doesn't introspect, doesn't exploit it, feels embarrassed and defensive rather than enriched with a new piece of information, and tries to explain why he made the mistake rather than moving on. These types often consider themselves the quote-unquote victims of some large plot, a bad boss, or bad weather. Finally, a thought. He who has never sinned is less reliable than he who has only sinned once. And someone who has made plenty of errors, though never the same error more than once, is more reliable than someone who has never made any. And so that last piece there is the part that, like, I like that characterization of a loser, and I feel like we could, like, riff on that. But this point of, like, someone who's never sinned is less reliable than he who has only sinned once. It's just, like, an interesting idea of, like, someone who's never actually sinned before is less reliable than someone who's sinned but has never done it again.
Yeah, well,
Like,
I think that's like pretty prominent these days, is like the people who have never sinned, like fucking charlatans, just like, like preachers who like have never done anything like what they're preaching before. It's like people, I mean, you see it all the time on like social medias and shit, like especially like I feel like especially Twitter, but it's like people, and like I know he's talking about like made errors, but like you have to do something to make an error, you know what I mean? Like people who like never do anything, like yeah, you could never make an error that way, but you're also like not worthless, but in that regard, it's worthless. Like what is your word? Nothing. If you haven't ever done, I mean, what you're talking about in that realm. So I feel like that's like a valid point. Like I totally agreed with what he said there.
Yeah. I just thought it was like, I don't know, it's just something like a weird way of thinking about things that, like, I don't know, someone who's, the fact that by not having ever sinned, you're less reliable than someone who's done it and decided not to do it anymore. Like, because you could at any point decide to sin for the first time. Like, you know what I mean? Whereas the other person has already been there, done that, realized they don't want to do that. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Well, are you thinking of sin as in like an actual sin? Or is that how, it sounds like that's how you're talking about, like a bad thing. I think a sin is like an error, like a mistake. You know what I mean? Like an error. So he's like, that person's less reliable. What did you say?
Yeah, he uses it again, like using the word error, but it's the same thing. Like you go against the grain. You know what I mean? Or like you break the rules.
Yeah. I was thinking of it like error, like you did something wrong, like not wrong in like the terms of like culture or society, but like technically wrong, like within like a function. So it's like that person who's never done that is more unreliable because at least that person who's committed the error and multiple errors, but never the same way once, they could be like, hey, you should do it this way. I know because I've done it 2,000 other ways, like he said with like Edison with the light bulb. You know what I mean? And it's like, I know these aren't the way. Whereas, a person with no errors, they could recommend all 200 wrong ways before they know that that's not how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
So I think
exactly.
It just boils down to like, I think like the oldest, not metaphor. I can't even think of the word right now. But it's like, people who like talk the talk versus people who like walk the walk. I feel like that's like something people have said since like forever. And it's like, it holds true. And he's just saying that in like a more educated way,
I like the other point too around like the characterization of a loser. So
what was that?
A loser is someone who, after making a mistake, doesn't introspect, doesn't exploit it, feels embarrassed and defensive rather than enriched with a new piece of information, and then tries to explain why he made the mistake rather than moving on. So like, I don't know, it's just a good way to like live, of like making a mistake and realizing like, I made a mistake, I need to think about this, learn from it, and then move on, rather than being like making an excuse for like why the mistake happened and never learning from it. All right, well, what's your next topic? Because we're moving on.
Well, I had two. I think, one I found, I think, more interesting than I would have if we didn't just read two books on evolution, but evolution and fragility, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and anti-fragility. And just because like I said, we just read two fucking books on that. And if you haven't listened to them, they're great, trust me. But, thinking about it in like the context of, like, you think about like Darwinism and natural selection and everything like that. But like natural selection is just a way of, like, only the strong will survive is like basically the same as only the fragile will perish and the anti-fragile will survive. You know what I mean? Like, it's like they're basically like the same exact content, but I thought it was like super interesting on that level. And then on top of it, the, like, not the black swan, but like the randomness and like how that plays a big role. Like you said, that there's like two major ways randomness plays the role in like evolution. One is like the randomness of mutations, and one's the randomness of the environment. And like when I read like the randomness of mutations, like, I don't know, right away, like I just thought of like the peas that we read about that like exploded from the pod so that they could spread and germinate, and like that's a totally random mutation, and then those were the more anti-fragile of like harvesting, I guess you would say. And so like those are the ones that survived. And like the randomness of like the environment like made me start thinking of like the whole, like, why, like, Eurasia and then like Western Europe like conquered. It's because like the randomness that like was just given to the people, you know what I mean? And like I guess that made, I don't know if like that, so like would being from like like Eurasia and like the beginning days, like the Paleolithic days, would you be anti-fragile for being born into the random and like environment of like the Fertile Crescent, or would you be just more fragile being born like basically anywhere else? Can you like? I guess like are they exactly related? Like if they are super fragile because of this food reason, the same food reason as to why this would they then be anti-fragile? Like, did the like polar opposites?
I think it comes back to like, it's not like a negative mutation, you know what I mean? So like everyone's exposed to like negative mutations and like negative black swans or whatever, to being like just being born there, you're gaining from
the randomness. Yeah,
I think it just comes down to like you were just born in an area where like that because like that area wasn't necessarily like anti-fragile, you know what I mean? It was just like that area was maybe in a way.
Well, could you say it was anti-fragile because without people being there, like the plant, like could the pea be anti-fragile because it mutated in a way it had a random event that changed it in a way that it could be then like mass fucking germinated on a larger scale because randomly humans decided to be there. Like, can a pea be anti-fragile? Is that a thing? Can a fucking pea be anti-fragile, Shane? Like, these are this is where I'm foggy, bro. Okay, like this is where I start to get confused. It makes sense to me, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean it definitely makes sense. I'm just thinking about someone being born there. Like, I don't think a person is anti-fragile in that sense. Like, there's
But they're nothing. It's not. It's just not relatable in that
It's
context. They're just lucky.
Yeah, I think if they were just lucky, maybe the pea could be anti-fragile. I don't know. That's a good question.
I'm asking Taleb dead ass after this episode.
I think what the point he made is that nature is anti-fragile. Like, nature as a whole gains from this evolutionary process. But like the system, like some pieces of the system are fragile so that the other pieces could gain, and like the whole system itself is gaining.
Yeah, like you're talking about the cells that like they kill off the bad ones so that the human's healthier. But let me ask you this, because he does say a lot of times in the book that nature is anti-fragile to a point, you know? So like, how do you know, like, is that tipping point, like I know I wrote this in the book, but I just remember, but like, is that tipping point like when it becomes like the stressor's no longer like that mild stressor that makes you stronger, but it's like too much? Is that like fucking climate like change like to the extreme? Like, is that the point that like breaks Mother Nature? You know what I mean? Like, what is that point where it's like no longer like,
and you can't gain infinitely? Like, I think that there's just a point where like I think he's talking about like truly anti-fragile or things that can gain infinitely, you know, from like, because there reaches a point where like there's just like there's no more improvement for nature. Like, let's,
yeah.
you know,
Well, I'm
like,
just saying with humans, dude, like we're slowly killing the earth, let's say, and like it's, let's say it only gets worse. Like, hopefully we're making it better, but like how are we making Mother Nature stronger right now?
Well, because Mother Nature, dude, if we all die because crazy climate change or whatever, like that's good for Mother Nature, because then we'll be gone and there'll be less polluting and like it'll just be back, you know. So like,
okay,
you know, Mother Nature's not dying right now. Like, we're killing off things that live on the planet, let's just say. But like the planet itself and like organisms, etc., like they will, like, from the fucking ashes, like will come fucking things will start like amoebas and over millions.
Yeah. I told, just like back before.
Yeah, exactly. Like how things were.
Like how it happened.
Yeah, exactly how it happened. So like, it'll just start over. It's not like there are things we're killing things.
You're right. Absolutely. We're not killing the earth. We're killing things on the earth.
Yeah. That we call like the things, like the actual nature is just like everything. Everything is nature. You know what I mean? So like, little things are getting killed and little like small like species and whatever, but like the whole thing, like we're a part of this whole thing. You know what I mean? So like,
yeah. Where do you think Mother Nature stops and like the universe begins? And like, obviously not like a real like a place, but like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, you think of Mother Nature to a certain extent, but like, what is that extent? And like, when
nature in general, I mean, like, dude, I think
once it gets out of like the ozone, it's like no longer Mother Nature, it's the universe. Or is Mother Nature the universe? Like, is like our Mother Nature the same Mother Nature on Mars? You know? Or is there two different Mother Natures? And now we're talking about a bunch of celestial fucking beings, bro. Now we got whole populations of fucking angels and shit.
Nature, like, this is a person that's like hanging out outside.
No, I'm not. But I'm talking about it as like a complex system, and like there could be more of these systems, and if these systems have somewhat intelligence.
Well, dude, so yeah, I think that it just kind of depends on where you want to call it. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, like the sun could freaking, you know, the heat death of the fucking universe could come or whatever. Like the sun could fucking explode, whatever happens there, I don't really
Yeah.
know. But like then we're gone, but like technically we've just evaporated, like whatever. I don't know. I don't know how to think about that. Like, are we still? Is that still part of nature? Like, sure, if that's what you count, but
Nah, I don't. Yeah, right. I don't know. I don't know what made during this conversation made me think about that, but something for sure fucking did. What's your next point?
um, all right. So there's this idea of like, when you're trying to figure out what could happen, like when people are trying to estimate worst case scenarios, like there's this idea of where he says risk management professionals look in the past for information on the so-called quote unquote worst case scenario and use it to estimate future risks. This method is called stress testing. They take the worst historical recession, the worst war, the worst historical move, blah blah blah, and they use that as an estimate for the worst future outcome. But they never notice the following inconsistency. This so-called worst case event, when it happened, exceeded the worst case at the time. I have called this mental defect the Lucretius problem, after the Latin poetic philosopher who wrote that the fool believes that the tallest mountain in the world will be equal to the tallest one he has observed. So, like, it's this idea that nobody, like, they use this method called stress testing. It's like, hey, well, if we're trying to estimate, like, how bad the market collapse could be, like, let's look at the last market collapse and see how bad that was. Like, let's look at the Great Depression, and, like, that's how bad it could be. It couldn't get worse than that. But, like, the Great Depression was the worst market collapse ever before that. Like, any market collapse before that, it overtook that. And they never realized that, like, every worst is always worse than the one before that.
Yeah. And that the next one's gonna be worse than the one that was just before that. But you
Yeah,
know
like,
what that made me think when I read it? It's just like, is the problem that we're not thinking of the absolute worst case, or that you can't really judge? You can't really at like the most like accurate, I guess, like
you just don't
number.
know.
Like what? Like so? Like I get it's wrong to not use like only the last one, and like especially if there's like historical fucking like a pattern of like you thinking that's the worst one. Like don't use that one. Like maybe like times it by 2, times it by 100, times it by 50 million. Like I guess that's what I'm getting at. Is that like it can't something could get infinitely worse. Just like it could get infinitely better.
So that's the thinking that you need to have, not like, oh, it can't be worse than the
Oh,
last
then
one.
yeah. No, I get that.
Yeah. You
But
can't use putting a number to it is just being dishonest. Like, oh, we're gonna use 4x the last one because like that will account for how bad it could get. Like it couldn't, and it could get infinitely bad. So like it could get like the world, like it could get so bad that the world collapses. You know what I mean? Like if that's sure, that could happen. Good, let's use that.
if that's your absolute worst case.
I mean, like, let's be honest about what the worst case is. Like, the market could collapse, everything could go into freaking complete hell, and World War III could happen.
Oh,
and, like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like,
We're in a nuclear holocaust, and here we go.
Yeah, exactly. Like, boom. All right,
But I feel like that's the worst case scenario for literally everything. Like, everything. Could, like, if you talk about the infinite, like... What is I feel like the worst case scenario is we blow up the earth in every single situation possible, like no matter what it is. Like what's the worst case scenario of me driving McDonald's and like getting a thing? Like I don't know, I fucking hit somebody in my car and that person was like somebody important and like one thing leads to another and a country's mad at another country and now but you know what I mean? Like I get like the probability of those probably differ like a lot between me getting McDonald's and like I don't know, the financial collapse leading to like a World War III is probably way higher than like the McDonald's thing. But like worst case scenario is always gonna be like that. So like, granted, you can't like factor that for everything. Like then where do you go?
You think about it like, I mean, just using like monetarily as an example, like your worst case, like my worst case scenario with work and like money is like, oh, my worst case scenario is if everything doesn't work out, like I have, like, luckily for me, I have to go move in with my parents. You know what I mean? Like, that's really, like, it could be so much worse than that, but, like, the decisions that I'm making, the career moves that I'm making, like, the real worst case scenario is that, like, not counting what could happen with, like, my family, etc. You know what I mean? Like, you could get really crazy and be like, okay, oh, well, like, what is the worst case. But like in reality, the worst case scenario is I lose absolutely everything, and I have absolutely nothing, and I'm completely poor, and I have to move back in with my parents. Then maybe my parents could lose everything, but then I have to move back in with like a family member. You know what I mean? Like
Eventually, they're not going to take you. You can't ask like a third cousin to take you and all the other cousins and your family.
That's the thing. Well, like if you think
It
about
compounds on top of itself.
yeah, that's like someone else. That's like making this like I don't know. I think that you could think of it that way in like, or maybe I don't know. Like who knows? It could be way worse than that. The worst case scenario in reality of like the market going to complete shit, whatever, is that everyone loses their job. You know what I mean? There is no safety net. You know, so like, which is something that's good to think about and plan for.
Yeah,
Like,
right. Well, thank God money's made up, and that will never happen. So we don't really got to worry about that. Thank God economic collapse is just a construct made, and we don't really got to worry about it because there's no such thing as currency.
As long as we don't tell anybody that money's that's basically the whole idea behind Sapiens.
Yeah, right. As long as everyone believes it, it's fine.
Yeah, money is real as long as everyone believes in it. So don't tell anyone.
Well, it would totally be a black swan if because of this episode everybody stopped believing in money, though. How could you be anti-fragile to that? Being Mother Nature, hoping everyone dies off. I feel like you want to hear I swear to God, it's either because like I think it's because like I don't have a good grip on it, like enough of a grip to like I want to throw it on everything. This is anti-fragile. This is anti-fragile. And I wrote, dude, I swear to God, I remember listening to like Made You Think, and like Nat and Neil, they would do the same shit. Everything's anti-fragile. I'm like, all right, well, everything's fucking. You know what I mean? Like it's easy to throw I feel like it's easy to throw that word around without like meaning. Like I think it's easy to make it synonymous with like protected or like robust. I think it's like people probably interchange like robust and anti-fragile a lot if they had to. But I think you know what I mean, like that's totally gonna be like my fucking like gripe with it. I'm not. I mean, I'm gonna call out things anti-fragile when they're actually just robust. But it's just like actually like if something, because you know what it is. It's like could something benefit from like the randomness? It's because and I feel like in all honesty, can something benefit from the negative randomness? You know what I mean? It's not. I feel like that's the context it's like put in, but not said explicitly in. You know what I mean? Like I'm sure that there's like positive randomness, but like that's just serendipity. You know what I mean? Like I guess you could be like more like try to position yourself in a more open way to like what I mean be more exposed to positive like what I mean events. But
that's where I think he talks about in like one of these approaches, like I feel like the easiest illustration is like that barbell idea of like by being super robust with all of your money in cash, like you may gain from disorder a little bit by having all your money in cash, but like that 10%, you're exposed to positive black swans. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
but because a negative black swan happened.
No. But because of a positive, like you have your money in very speculative bets, like your 10%, like on things going super well. You know what like if things go super well, this company could 3x. You know what I mean? And it's like so, crazy thing happens, company 3x is like you're benefiting from a positive black swan.
Yeah.
So
let me ask you this: if you had one choice, would you rather be more susceptible to positive black swans, or less susceptible to negative black swans, or do they equal out?
I think less susceptible to negative because the risk. I think that like one of the ideas is that the risk is ruin. Like being susceptible to negative black swans is like it's not like the worst case scenario is being zero, like ruin, no money left whatsoever, or dying. You know what I mean? Like there's a risk of losing everything. And I think he mentions it like in this part.
So
of,
like, by choosing
rules of
what?
Like one of the rules of trading, like stock trading, is like making sure that you're there tomorrow. Like take as many risks as you want, but always make sure that you show up. You can show up the next day. Like you didn't lose everything. So you
Yeah.
could trade again tomorrow. You know what I mean? Because like if you lose everything, you're out of the game.
That's
You know,
true.
so like you always want to make sure that you at least can keep playing in a sense.
So wouldn't that decision, I feel like, I don't know, like, would the decision to avoid negative black swans, thus, so you're avoiding the negative black swans, and then you didn't choose to get the positive black swans, so you'd honestly just be robust. That decision would make you robust. You would never lose your money, and you would never gain from it either.
But you're not. I don't know. In
You're
a
gonna
sense,
be
by
you're gonna
not
be break even either way because you're never gonna lose because you're not getting a negative black swan, and you're never gonna gain because that's not an option. So then you have to be robust. Then that would be like the logical kind of middle ground right there.
yeah. You think you'd be robust, or you could be like because
Like enforced to fragility, like the
there's
polar
between a
opposite.
positive and a negative black swan. Like where you could be susceptible to positives, and also not like you could be not susceptible to positives,
And exposed to
but
negatives
gain
still.
from negatives. You could still gain from negatives. Like you could be not susceptible to like good black swans of like, hey, the market fucking went up 300% because of some random thing, while also gaining from the negatives. Like you could be very speculatively like buying like out of the money options or whatever as an example with that 10% that the market's going to tank. You know what I mean? And like over time, eventually, if the market does tank, you could gain from that because you'll make so much money off of those like positions. So you gain from the negative, although you were never exposed to the positive. Like you never gained anything from the positive ones.
I feel like that was implying that you knew the negative. You were going to be you were guaranteed beneficial of the negative. You
Not
know,
like
I feel like that was like that comparison was just like you were like you could be out of the money on the positive, but like you know that the negative is going to happen, so you could just make a lot on it. It's like 99.9% people don't know of the negative,
No, but
you know.
I mean,
Like what's
no,
realistically more likely someone like, or at least, all right, that's a horrible example, but like what is more commonly assumed that like the market's gonna go up or that like
so
financial. I know that's why this happens, but
no. I think that even regardless, even if you had 100% of your money in cash, you could still gain.
That's a good
from
idea.
It's not necessarily a good idea because you're losing out on all the gains, like on the regular day.
Yeah.
But when stuff does crash, you could be, you know, in a position to take large positions and make a lot of money. You know, when things go back up. You know what I mean?
Like
So,
a Warren Buffett type of dude.
Yeah, exactly. Like in some ways, Warren Buffett is anti-fragile. Of course, I mean he wouldn't be as
Well, no,
robust
he
as
would
say-
be robust. No, because when the market tanks, he buys a lot. Yeah, so he's
Yeah, he buys a
anti-fragile.
lot.
Yeah, okay.
He buys everything.
Yeah.
So, like, and he benefits from the market tanking essentially.
So let me ask you this. Let's say I have all my money in cash, waiting for the day that the markets crash to buy up shares of companies. So I wait 10 years. I forego all that interest I could have made in even a fucking savings account. And then the market finally crashes. In that moment, when the market crashes, I'm anti-fragile. But the 10 years leading up, am I anti-fragile or am I robust? Because I'm not losing. I feel like it's so fluid a scale. It's you're only anti-fragile when that thing happens. Up until then, you're fucking robust, you know?
You're anti-fragile, and also like you're losing, so it's not like necessarily a good strategy because you're losing on that 8%, like that return. So over time, you probably would end up making less money, but it just kind of depends on how things shake out. But like that whole time, because you can't predict when these events are going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So like the day that the doesn't happen, you are still anti-fragile.
The day it what?
You're still robust. The day it doesn't happen, because it could have happened. You know what I mean? So like your whole position and like having all your money on hand which who knows? Like, obviously this is like really like there's so much more nuance here, but like
Yeah,
the
of
whole
course.
time leading up to that event, you're in a position where you will gain from disorder.
But like,
Like
if you
you will.
were, if okay, so okay, but if that position never comes, were you were so you would say you were in an
So
anti-fragile
position.
position, you just never reaped the benefits of it?
Well, I think that the other thing is that like we know that these events happen. We just can't predict them.
Yeah, exactly. So it could happen in 50 years. You know what I mean? It could happen in 70 years. We could be dead by the time they happen. So like
Exactly.
what is really so like I don't know. I feel like the thing that trips me up is that like there's so much you could think about and like do. It's like to be if I want to be anti-fragile in like all areas like I could I don't know, like buy some stocks, like invest in some property. Like I could be so fucking well. That would be eventually that'd be robust, right? But it's just like I don't
Yeah,
know.
well, I think
The
that's
shit
where
trips me
it
up,
gets.
yo. Sometimes.
Well, I think that's like I don't know, perfect segue into like the fact that there's still three more sections left that are going to talk about all this stuff.
Oh
You
yeah.
know what I mean? It's like we're in the first 100 pages.
All right. Well, that was section one. Hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you think, and yeah, next week we'll be going over the next two books, and hope to see you there. Take it easy.
Nice.